Eliphas Levi and the Occult Tarot. Yeah, this is a very obsessive dive into tarot. So I'm going to zoom. Alphonse Louis Constant, also known as Eliphas Levi Zahed, he's Hebraized or Judaized his name, indicative of his absolute fascination with Jewish Kabbalah and Christian Kabbalah. He's a ceremonial magician, also a socialist. Julian Struber did a very good thesis about this. He's extremely influential in the French occult revival and the idea of occultism as opposed to earlier occult philosophy, with an influence on things like the Ordre Kabbalistique de la Rose-Croix in France and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in England. Much more can be said, but we've no time. Publishing various books, but what I'm going to stress here is, the occult revival is often classed as something late 18th century, 19th century, and the dawn of occult tarot, this idea of divination. Levi is ambivalent about divination, or at least he's ambivalent about fortune telling, but he's absolutely fascinated in magic. And for him, tarot is as much about magic and alchemy as it is about fortune telling. So I want to give a slightly different story based on very close obsessive reading of works like this Dogme et Rituel de la Haute Magie. That's volume 1. This is volume 2 with the famous Baphomet image. Histoire de la Magie, 1860, and then things like these Clavicles of Solomon and the Clé Majeur. What he does in these works is acknowledges his precursors or predecessors. In Antoine Cour de Gébelin in the 18th century publishes Monde Primitif, and in the 8th volume he publishes 2 essays, basically. I'm going to read you a little bit of what Levi says. The famous book of Taut, spelled in various ways, Toth, suspected by Cour de Gébelin to have been preserved until our days in the form of this game of bizarre cards that one calls tarot. Okay, in the 8th volume of Monde Primitif, he gives the figures of the 22 keys, meaning the 22 major arcana cards we've looked at, and the 4 aces of tarot at the very end of the book. And in showing the perfect analogy with all the symbols of most ancient antiquity, by which he means Egypt. So we get the Egyptomania creeping in then. We haven't had ideas about that before him, really. He kicks it off. So in his essay, he includes, if you look where I put the red square, it's an Egyptian book. That's what he's arguing. He also publishes this essay by the Comte de Melay. And if you look under the subtitle there, it's about divination with tarot cards. Okay, so we get this idea of divinatory uses. But the Comte de Melay also is the person who says, the Hebrew has 22 letters, Major Arcana has 22 cards. Gosh, there must be something there. But he doesn't really develop it much. Levi takes up that challenge and develops it in what I think are very interesting ways. What are the cards that appear at the back of this volume 8? You can see them here. They're very much based on the Tarot de Marseille. So on the left, you've got the Magician, then you've got the Fool, and so on and so forth. It's curious to see that the Hanged Man, the bottom row, second from the right, the Hanged Man is actually standing upwards with the number 12 above his head, as opposed to hanging upside down. But so interesting to see already slight sort of inconsistencies or contradictions. Another source that Levi mentions is Jean-Baptiste Aliette, who is so enamored of the Jewish idea that he writes his own name backwards, as if you're reading Hebrew right to left, and gets Eteia. He also rather peculiarly takes the order of the major arcana and reverses them. So you get them backwards, and you get them in a very weird sequence. You get, I have to say, I agree with Levi, rather bizarre interpretations of some of the cards. But what is interesting is that he publishes books first about enjoying using cards, and then in later editions, enjoying using tarot cards, where he talks about cartonmancy, divination of things printed on card, which becomes shortened into cartomancy. And he has a very idiosyncratic system of laying out cards, pretty complicated actually, to give meanings about, fortune telling. There are other people, but we don't have time. You've got this in the exhibition, don't you? You got the one from the Welcome. This is from the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. It's a lovely layout of the Eteia cards. But if you look at 3 examples I've given here, they are bizarre. And it shows you, I think, a sort of crappy attitude towards the occult. I mean, the Magician is malady, which is not great. The Hermit is a traitor. So you know. And then what is the last card, actually, card 78, is the Fool. And in another version of this Atea deck, these, I have to say, are after Atea's death, the 19th century ones. But if you look at this one, it's on the left corner on the right side and right, La Folie ou l'Alchimiste. So the Fool or the Alchemist, which again is a rather sort of jaundiced idea about what alchemy is, unless you think the Fool is all wonderful and lovely. But to be honest, it isn't here particularly. But anyway, this is an engagement with cartomancy, divination, but not really well read in occult philosophy, compared to Eliphas Levi, who is really well read in a lot of these subject areas. He's rather snotty about Atea, calls him a wig maker more than once, and is extremely dismissive. But anyway, let's see what Eliphas Levi says in various books about the Book of Thoth, which he tends to call more the Book of Hermes. He runs with, as I think almost as a thought experiment, the idea of ancient Egypt. But for him, it's Hermes Trismegistus in ancient Egypt, and the Emerald Tablet, and the whole sort of mytho-history, as it were, of Hermes as the great grandpappy of all alchemists, and ideas like as above, so below from the Emerald Tablet, which are popular in magic, the idea of the stars above influencing the earth below, as they are in alchemy. And this is more Levi's perspective, and a well-read perspective too. He's actually, if you're interested in Hermetica, he's interested in the technical and the philosophical Hermetica, which is interesting. Anyway, the Book of Hermes, the universal key of the magical arts, is the key of all the ancient religious dogmas, the key of the Kabbalah, of the Bible, the little key of Solomon. For this clavicule or little key that one believed lost for centuries, we have rediscovered it, and we've been able to open all the tombs of the ancient world, make the dead speak, see again in all their splendor the monuments of the past, understand the enigmas of all the sphinxes, and penetrate all the sanctuaries. So you've got antiquity, you've got sort of necromancy thrown in for good measure, you've got sphinxes there as a motif of antiquity. But he's not making any claims to any of the images being specifically Egyptian. I love this quote, which, I mean, Levi trained as a priest and then discovered girls and decided not to be a priest anymore. But in this, the Bible is an inspired book, but the Tarot is the book that inspires. I find that dodgy religiously, but at the same time fascinating, you know. And the Tarot, above all, this Kabbalistic and learned book. I mean, Eliphas Levi's Zahed is literally Alphonse Louis Constant Judaized. All the combinations of which are a revelation of the pre-existing harmonies between signs, letters, and numbers. The Tarot is then of blah, 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 blah. Signs, letters, and numbers. If you think of the fact that the Hebrew alphabet is alphanumeric, they're letters and they are numbers. Aleph is 1, Beit is 2, and so forth. And he's aware of that. And he also brings in the idea of the hieroglyphs as the Egyptian component of them, that their visual imagery is with a sacred dimension. Am I speaking too fast? Okay. Cartomancy, then, it's really interesting to read that he's quite ambivalent about it. Cartomancy, well understood, is a true consultation of spirits. Now, if you've had a tarot reading, I don't know whether, I mean, Safa, do you consult spirits when you do tarot readings? That's, oh, okay, that's good. The spirit of Rumi, probably, but anyway. Without necromancy and without sacrifices, he's not into black magic, in his opinion. It therefore requires the assistance of a good medium, the practice of which is moreover dangerous. Wow. And we do not recommend it to anyone. Is not then the memory of our miseries enough to aggravate our sufferings in the present? Must we still burden them with all the anxiety of the future? So is fortune telling good for your health? You know, go and doom scroll through Instagram instead and suffer every day in advance the catastrophes that it's impossible for us to avoid. So he's not sure whether trying to figure out what the future is a good idea. Okay, consulting cards and tarot cards is a true evocation in a magical sense that cannot be done without danger and crime. Wow. So Safa will get arrested as soon as he leaves the room. In evocations, we force our astral body to appear to us. In divination, we force it to speak to us. Poor astral spirit, I have to say, or astral body, rather. So I'm sort of moderating a little bit this idea of the fortune telling bit. He does advocate it to a certain extent, but there are other dimensions. Read what he has to say about divination. This is, pedant speak, I'm afraid. According to the common meaning of the word, it sounds quite academic here, to divine means to conjecture what one does not know. But the true meaning of the word is ineffable by dint of being sublime. To divine, divinare, is to exercise divinity. The word divinus in Latin means more and something other than the word divus, whose meaning is the equivalent of the man god. A bit vague, that. To be a diviner, according to the force of the word, is therefore to be divine and something even more mysterious. So for him, looking at cards, it's a process almost of deification, though I'm exaggerating a bit there. I'm tying it into other ideas in the past. But this idea of not future looking, but tuning into the divine. The essence of divination, that is to say, the great magical arcana, is represented by all the symbols of science, or knowledge if you prefer, and is closely linked to the unique and primitive dogma of Hermes, as in Hermes Trismegistus, as in Thoth, as in Mercurius. But to succeed in the great work, by which he means alchemy, and this is the great work, one must be divinus, or a diviner in the Kabbalistic sense of the word. So what he does is he goes from tarot and he allies with alchemy, which he classes as a form of tarot, and with Kabbalah, which again he links with tarot. I've not linked here because I didn't have time, but he even discusses the I Ching that Leibniz is interested in as Chinese tarot. So his idea of what divination is broader and fuzzier. Okay, divination is therefore an intuition, and the key to this intuition is the universal and magical dogma of analogies. This is where academics can actually get a foothold into the subject by analogous reasoning. The magician interprets dreams, as we see in the Bible that the patriarch Joseph did formerly in Egypt. So we've got the Egyptian connection again, but with a Jewish connection is Joseph in Egypt. And dreams, the Comte de Melay, whom I mentioned briefly, who links the Hebrew alphabet, 22 letters, with the major arcana, he says alchemy is good for interpreting dreams, you know. So, I mean, Carl Jung would find this fascinating. I don't think he was aware of that, but it would be a direction he'd like to go, I'm sure. Okay, what's his knowledge of tarot? I mean, you know, one of the questions is, you know, he's writing in the 19th century, so who's he aware of? This is a nice example. Thoth's alphabet is the original of our tarot, only in a roundabout way, because we don't have, you know, tarot cards engraved on pyramids, literally. The tarot we have is of Jewish origin. Interesting, but this is the Hebrew alphabet idea. And the types of figures do not go back further than the reign of Charles VI. Jacquemin Grangonneur's deck, which is, Grangonneur is a card maker recorded as being commissioned to make a tarot deck in the 14th century. Whether it's really tarot is debatable, but this deck, which is actually in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, is called the Charles VI deck. It's a gorgeous incomplete deck, but it's got the Hermit, the Moon, the Sun, and the World, and various other cards there. But this is, he goes through the Imperial Library, and I'm sure this is the deck he has in mind for it. He also recommends one of his followers to get an old Italian tarot, easily found in Marseille. So his Italian style deck is actually a Marseille deck. And it's nice, in Histoire, he makes a reference to the will of the adept is represented by the broad-shouldered child mounted on a white horse, a hieroglyph that we found on an ancient tarot from the Imperial Library. And it's this, it must be the Tarot de Jacques Vieilleville, 1650. This is, I didn't say that Eliphas Levi's deck survives in the tarot, the card Museum of Playing Cards in Paris. And it's an extended deck of 97 cards, one of which is this, which I think is a very attractive copy. And those of you who know the Wade Smith deck, these are precursors surely of the choice to have, you know, cherub riding on a horsey. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Do you want to take a photo? So, certainly not me. I'm not. Anyway, when we're talking about hieroglyphs, one of the works he definitely has in mind is Les Figures Hiéroglyphiques of Nicolas Flamel, you know, Dumbledore's friend. I had to slide that in. I'm childish. Yeah, I know. 1612, it was published. But what is interesting is in the 18th century, an enterprising guy had a sort of cottage industry of making copies of this manuscript. There are two in Amsterdam, there's one in the Bibliothèque Nationale, one in Switzerland, and so forth. But it's the book of Abraham the Jew. And the story is that Flamel buys this book full of symbolism from Abraham the Jew, or created by Abraham the Jew. And it's the book of hieroglyphic figures. And I find it fascinating that this is the manuscript on the left, but this is Levi in another of his books, The Key of the Great Mysteries, who's clearly drawing from it. And he's discussing it in the context of alchemy, but also in the context of tarot, saying that they are tarotic images. See, Caduceus and the Brazen Serpent, and then this is a sort of a simulation of that by Flamel. This one here of a rose bush around an oak tree and so forth. The oak tree is actually a symbol for the alchemical vessel, the Athanor, if you obsess about alchemy. But here's Levi's version. And then this gruesome thing, the massacre of the innocents from, the New Testament, where Herod says, I don't want anyone replacing me, kill all the boys who are born in this region. Here, the blood is used by the alchemists for making sangria. No, not really, but here you have it in a slightly more sedate version on the right-hand side from Levi. So again, I'm hoping I'm giving you a different story of tarot is slightly interdisciplinary in his view. He doesn't have many tarot cards. So Jonathan apologizing, there's no real need in that. I only know of 2 cards that appear in his works. One is this, which I find amazing, and it's Egyptianized. It's got 2 sphinxes at the bottom. This, you've not seen this before. Normally, and also on the left, you've got Zayin, the Hebrew letter, and number 7 on the right. So you've got the Hebrew there, you've got Egypt there. You've got Tarot de Marseille images as the basis, but he's modified it. And we know from the Playing Card Museum in Paris that he had a deck by Bernardin Suzin, 1839 deck. He's one of the last great card makers of the Marseille Tarot. This is not me. This is a guy called Marco Benedetti, who is a tarot card maker, who I was going to give a totally different talk, but Marco printed and published this deck a few months ago, and I squeaked when I saw it and bought it, and it's fascinating. And if you're interested, Pablo Robledo, another card maker, is making another version of this deck, and we'll see that he annotates it in a very interesting way. Anyway, so this is a version of his deck. And then he also, because I mentioned Jacques Vieilleville with the young boy on the horse, look at this. It's a sort of transition where you get horses as the traditional thing, then you get quadrupeds with human faces as an intermediary, even though this is 1650. There are earlier decks with horses. And then you get the sphinxes. So it's interesting to see. I love difference, and here you've got it. And this is what he says, just to give you some idea. My timing is crap. The number 7 represents magical power in all its strength. It's the spirit assisted by all the elemental powers. It's the soul served by nature. It's the sanctum regnum, the spoken of in the Clavicles of Solomon, and which is represented in the tarot by a crowned warrior wearing a triangle, well, that's a bit dubious, on his breastplate, standing on a cube to which are harnessed 2 sphinxes, one white, the other black, which pull in opposite directions. It makes me think of Plato's, chariot as well, and the horses. The cube is the philosophical stone, so we're back to alchemy there. The sphinxes are the 2 forces of the great agent of alchemy, so Mercury and sulfur, for example. The triumphant figure has on his shoulders the Urim and Thummim, which are connected with the high priest Aaron in the Old Testament, by which, the Kabbalist priest communicates with God. Figured as 2 crescents of the moon in Gedula and Geburah. If you know the Baphomet image, he's alluding to that, actually, but we don't have time. The Sphinx that turns its head is black. The other is white. And then I won't go through because I'm realizing time is bad, but we have an Indian lingam there, and we have a flying spear of Egyptians. So it's a very cosmopolitan idea that he's drawing from different traditions. It's very syncretic. This one I like from Sanctum Regnum, a later work by him. The chariot has attached to its car a white and also a black sphinx. Moving on, the word of the white sphinx is Yakin, and the word of the black sphinx is Boaz. Now, these are the names of the 2 pillars in the Temple of Solomon. Levi was at one stage a Freemason, and these are very important symbols there. If you know the high priest in the Waite Smith deck, she's sitting between Yakin and Boaz, the 2 B and J on the card. What is nice, though, is here we get this ritual magic. He's a ceremonial magician. The former word here signifies love. The latter word here, power. Samael, who's the angel of Mars, is associated with the white sphinx, and Anael, the angel of Venus, with the black sphinx, because attraction is set up by contraries, which is interesting. It's almost yin-yang. You know, they've got the seed of their opposite in them. And that's not so specious to say that when you think Leibniz is interested in the I Ching. You know, we are the 19th century. Hermes in the chariot touches the black sphinx with the point of a sword of steel, but the white sphinx with a scepter of gold. Well, he doesn't actually have that here in his image. But remember, he's a ceremonial magician. After he said this, he talks about how to make ritual weapons, the four tools connected with the four elements of the four minor arcana. So the wand of fire, for example, and the sword of air. So again, he's giving you a different dimension than just fortune telling. Okay. This is the other one, and briefly just to say, Wheel of Fortune, it's got alchemical references, arche, azot, and hule. They're alchemical, you know, and it's, archeus is basically the function, the faculty inside you that makes things generate. It could be in your organs, you know, to make your liver function, but also in alchemical laboratory. Azoth is actually a bastardization of the Arabic al-Zawq, which means mercury, but they didn't know that at the time. They say Azoth is the first and last letters of the three biblical alphabets. So the A and the Alpha and Aleph are primal matter, and the Z, Omega, and Taf are ultimate matter, the philosopher's stone, and the Hule is primal matter. So he's Egyptianized it, because you've got, you know, these, well, you'll see what he says. If you look earlier at the other images I'm giving as examples, they're not Egyptian. He says the Wheel of Fortune is the Wheel of Ezekiel from the vision of Ezekiel. So there you've got an allusion to Kabbalah, and particularly Merkava Kabbalah. And then the Hermanubis rising on the right, a Typhon descending on the left, and a Sphinx above for equilibrium. So you've got, again, Kabbalah and Egypt. And he's snotty about Atea, who says he ruined it, basically. Typhon is a man, Hermanubis is a mouse, and the Sphinx is a monkey. And I have to say, I remember I've got this deck, and I went, what the hell? You know, I mean, seriously, a mouse. As he squeaks, I should be careful about that. Anyway, let's have a look quickly. And the deck, these are all cards in his extended deck. He's clearly into Mercury or Hermes. Yeah. This is the main card on the left with the annotations in it. And then he has an extra one. And then actually, this is not a tarot deck, it's an Alouette deck on the right-hand side. But again, they're all Mercury. You know, one of them is probably Freddie. I always make that joke. Sorry. I was a Queen fan as a kid. Anyway, this is his hand-painted version on the left, possibly printed and then painted over. On the right, this is an original Bernardin Suzanne, and you can see how close it is, though I'd say his is more artistic. Okay, what does he say? On the first page of the Book of Hermes, he discusses the cards as pages in the book. So page 1 is the first card in the tarot. Page 2 is the High Priestess, and so forth. The adept, so it's self-identification, he's the adept, you know, is depicted wearing a large hat, which when folded down can hide his entire head. Don't know why, but anyway. He holds a very occult, probably, yeah. He holds one hand raised towards the sky, which he seems to command with his wand. Well, the other isn't on his chest, it's lower down, but still. He has before him the principal symbols or instruments of science, and he hides others in a conjurer's bag on the right-hand side of the table. His body and arms form the letter Aleph, the first of the alphabet. So he's taking the Malays idea of the tarot cards and Hebrew alphabet, but Malay doesn't do anything with that. He just suggests. Eliphas is trying to take it, you know, so I'm Aleph, you know, and you wonder whether ritual postures come into it. Not that I'd be an elegant model for that. The magician is truly what the Hebrew Kabbalists call the microprosopos. I've spelled that wrong. It should be P-R-O. That is to say, the creator of the small world. The first magical science being the knowledge of oneself, so self-knowledge, you know, Delphic oracle material. The first also of all the works of science, blah, blah, blah. The principle of the great work, back to alchemy, is the creation of oneself. So his alchemy is broader. It's about self-transformation, but he's also very much interested in laboratory and transformations there. Okay, do I have time to go through some of this?
5 minutes.
Oh, okay. So yeah, that'll be good. Sorry, tricky. I'm a Virgo, ruled by lying, tricky Mercury. But anyway, okay, this is a later work. It's basically a manuscript that's been translated. And just, I'll zoom through some of it. We're talking about Aleph, the first letter of the alphabet, number 1. Yeah. Thus you see in Aleph all that is one, being is one, conceived of in its universality. The Spirit of God is one, the Spirit of man is one, and so forth. Looking down this diagram, you see that the Aleph represents the same time the diameter and the circumference, and a circular motion that's going on there to denote the unity of being. If we look in it, sorry, he has this in Aleph, in Kabbalah, you can take the letter Aleph and you can break it up. And he does that. And here's an example from one of my books. You've got the Aleph, it can split into 2 yods with the value of 10 each and a vav, the diagonal. And that comes to 26. Now, Jewish Kabbalists know the Aleph is also the same number as the most powerful divine name, the Tetragrammaton Yahweh, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, which is also 26. So he's not explaining, not even mansplaining, but he's alluding to the fact that you can deconstruct these. And just as an alchemist deconstructs matter, the Kabbalist deconstructs words and letters, and parts of letters even, which is what he's doing. And if you look obsessively at this card, look on his shoulder, and there's the Tetragrammaton written in. So, and above the word Hermes, which you can't really see, but it's there in the blue band. And what he also writes about is that other 4 letters, like Inri, Jesus Nazarenus Rex Judaeorum, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, is another 4-letter divine name for him, which is why it's on the other sleeve. These are annotations he's added. Okay, now real Virgo and obsessiveness. Now write the name of the letter. If you write Aleph as a word rather than just a letter, you get Aleph, Lamed, and Fe. And here, that's Aleph. And there is Aleph on his card, annotated. You have God, El, which means powerful, actually. And let's have a look through. You have being one. Well, it's the first card, so that's how it relates to it. And if you look at the very top of the card, it's Mercurius Astutus, so Panurgos, which translates as crafty, cunning, or tricksy Mercury, or again, Panurgos is the Greek for knavish and tricksy, or ready to do anything. So it's a nice gloss. And, he's writing about Halley magic, but this is a street trickster. This is the guy who does those cups where he, tricks you out of lots of money. So you get the sense, but also Mercury is the god of merchants and thieves, which I won't make any jaundiced comments about how they can be the same thing. But anyway, But it's interesting, if you look in the book of Corinthians, St. Paul also calls himself Panorgos as crafty or guile. And don't forget, Levi studied theology. So he's aware of these associations as well. Okay, the Lamed letter is connected with, the middle, with the Hanged Man. So what he's doing is he's using tarot as an exegetical tool to interpret words. This is divination, but it's divining the meaning of philosophical and religious texts. It's not fortune telling. And the perfect motion clearly is being held in, well, upside down in a sense of poise, meditative or otherwise. I mean, I often think of Odin hanging on the tree as well here, but it's here, the figure represents a man, blah, 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 completing the figure of the Hebrew Tau, because the letter Tau is a bit like this, that shape. Now, the triangle surmounted by a cross signifies in alchemy the end of perfection of the work. The triangle on the cross is actually sulfur in alchemy, one of the 2 ingredients of the medieval philosopher's stone. The hangman is therefore the adept again, like the magician is, bound by his commitment, spiritualized upside down. He's also the ancient Prometheus, who's bound to the rock, and the eagle or vulture tears out his liver. So there's a sense of sacrifice there. But what's interesting is he's not allegorizing. An allegory is often just a sort of 2-way street. It's this means that. This is Polysemous. There are different levels of meaning. So it can also be Judas the traitor. There are other levels of reading, which opens it up. Okay, I'll forget about the angel Cassiel. The final one is more Tessel's area, Andre Breton's area. Anyway, complete life is 17, and that's the star. And if we go through the card 17, the letter Fe is there on the card, and it's an admirable allegory, a naked woman who represents at the same time truth, nature, and wisdom, without veils, or unveiled, leaning two urns towards the earth and pouring fire and water. So we've got the old chemical bit there. Above her head shine the septenary stars, around a star of 8 rays, that of Venus, symbol of peace and love, and so on and forth. The butterfly of Psyche as an emblem as well, of the soul. It makes me think of Crowley's Fool card, which has got the butterfly of Psyche. And then just to zoom on a bit, he goes further, and it's interesting to see what he's reading. He says the hangman, the pendu, or the brilliant star, tie in with Leon III's Enchiridion. So, of course, I had to go and dig out the Enchiridion. This is the image he's referring to, reformation, formation, and transformation on the image. And if you read, it says, the two pentacles depicting on this plate are powerful in binding and bridling the most resolute spirits. So don't forget, I mentioned earlier, tarot involves communicating with spirits. This is their sentence and their condemnation. It means that they are dodgy spirits. You don't condemn good angels, you know. No strong and powerful magic book, because he thinks of the Book of Hermes, the Book of Thoth as a book, can be made without these two pentacles being imprinted on it. So again, you're getting a very broad idea of what his tarot is. You know, it's very much tied in with magic. And other things too. The numerical unity, or the letter Aleph, relates to the 11th path of the Sefer Yetzirah. Sefer Yetzirah is a proto-Kabbalistic work, the book of formation, some say creation, but connects it here with the tree of life, one of his diagrams. But if you look at it, the 11th path is the path between the highest Sephirot, Keter, and the next one, Chokmah, wisdom, and Aleph is there. So again, what he's doing is, I cheekily describe this as a Kabbalistic filing cabinet, where basically you have all of your associations and correspondences that fit into your worldview here, and he's showing you where his tarot cards fit. They fit on all of the intersections. I'm ignoring Jonathan for the moment. Sorry, Jonathan. Oh, you're there. Oh, God. And also he points out that the hat is, he doesn't say it's a lemniscate, but basically it's a figure 8 sleepily on its side. So you get lots of dimensions that get picked up by later tarot cards. Those little white books that you get with your tarot card are beneficiaries of some of these ideas. I'm going to, okay, we don't really have time, but I said he decodes Aleph, or deconstructs it, but he also takes the word Nahash. Now, Nahash in the Bible is snake or serpent. The book of Genesis, the snake is Nahash, but also the ones that Moses throws on the ground when he's fighting, competing with Pharaoh's priests, becomes a serpent, and that's Nahash as well. And he does exactly the same thing. He says Nun, the N of Nahash, is the N of tarot, temperance. The Hay is the 5th card, the Pope, and the Shin is the Fool. I'm not going to go into it, but if you see, reading right to left, Nahash, that's the snake. So he's really just intimating of ways that you can decode significant things in religious and occult philosophies through the tarot. We're nearly done, surprisingly. Without the tarot, the magic of the ancients is a closed book. Yeah. So it's not just you know, for exegesis or interpretation, it's almost like the battery pack. You know, if you don't have, the tarot is Duracell. We can probably, I won't use tarot cards for that. Anyway, you can't penetrate any of the great mysteries of Kabbalah without Duracell. Okay, the tarot alone gives the interpretation of the magic squares of Agrippa and Paracelsus. And this is a diagram from a covered manuscript of one of his works. But okay, what is nice is in his extended tarot, he has this. And come on, who's this engraving on the right by? Yeah, good. Do you know Dürer, I think his sun is conjunct Saturn. So he is a Saturnine, as is Marsilio Ficino. But I find this lovely that he creates a few extra cards. One is melancholy. And if you go to Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, there's your square. In the background is the square of Jupiter, which basically is cheering up poor glum Saturn by giving a bit of Jupiter. Okay, we're really nearly done. If you look at the second deck, just one annotation on the book that's open, Terra Philosophica Metallorum Mater, Philosophical Earth, Mother of Metals. So we're getting the High Priestess giving you intimations of the secrets of alchemy. And these extra cards, which we don't have time to because he's going to smack me around the head. Here is the Pope where he has extra wands. Here is the Hermit. And I'll end with this. I love this card. He's so in love with Hermes that he creates an extra card, Hermes and the Sphinx. And then he has Freddie Mercury on the right-hand side as the world. And I love this quote. Tarot is a veritable or true philosophical machine that prevents the mind from going astray.